Isolation, starvation, thoughts of hopelessness while surrounded by death. Rescue was hardly possible. The survivors of the ill-fated Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 endured it all at the Andes. Their survival, ultimately, depended on the sickening and the unimaginable. The fate of Flight 571 is one for the books, the horror books that is. Later known as the Miracle of the Andes and the Andes flight disaster, the incident is a result of a deadly miscalculation. For weeks, no one knew what happened to the aircraft, where exactly it was, and what happened to the passengers. All of that changed 72 days after the plane's disappearance and after everyone was presumed dead. Finally, rescue came, and a grand story of survival was told. The beginning of it all, though, was nothing monumental, just a simple rugby game set to take place in Chile. No one perceived that a scheduled amateur sporting event would redefine the image of the Andes, attaching to it both a dark, bloody history and a miraculous impression. It all started with the Old Christian Club's scheduled game against the English team Old Boys Club in Santiago, Chile. The Old Christians Club president chartered the Uruguayan Air Force plane to fly the team from Montevideo, Uruguay, to Santiago, Chile. It took off on October 13, 1972, Friday the 13th, with 5 crew members and 40 passengers, among them the rugby team players and their friends and family members. The Fairchild FH-227D plane is captained by Colonel Julio Cesar Ferradas, a seasoned pilot who had a total of 5,117 flying hours and had flown across the Andes Mountains 29 times already. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Dante Hector Laguarara, was fulfilling part of his training in this flight. It was all fun and excitement in the cabin. The team was looking forward to the Chilean sporting experience. However, in the cockpit, the captains were struggling to deal with an unsettling situation. Something was blocking the path ahead. That fateful day, heavy clouds obscured the mountain ranges. It was impossible for the pilots to visually confirm their exact location. Laguarara, the inexperienced pilot in command, thought that they were already approaching Curico, when it was, in fact, still 70 kilometers away from their position. By the time they realized that they were navigating the wrong path, it was too late. The plane was already heading dangerously close to the mountains. The aircraft struck the mountains many times on its way down before the fuselage finally came to rest in a then unnamed glacier. That unnamed glacier, eventually called Glacier of Tears, is situated between Mount Sosnido and Volcan Tinguiririca, standing on both sides of the isolated mountain borders of Argentina and Chile. Out of the 45 people in the plane, 12 died immediately in the crash. The next morning, another 5 succumbed to their injuries and due to the terrible freezing conditions. On the 8th day, another one perished. The remaining 27 who got away with less severe injuries struggled to hold on to their dear lives. Ingenuity helped them fight off death as it threatened them minute by minute. A bra and a sun visor from the pilot's cabin were used as goggles to prevent snow blindness. Seat cushions were used as snowshoes. A passenger found a way to melt snow for drinking water. Gustavo Zerbino and Roberto Canessa, both medical students at the time of the crash, were instrumental in looking after the health and boosting the morale of their comrades. They attended to people's wounds to the best of their abilities. Unfortunately, no one with compound fracture survived. With news of the plane's disappearance, search and rescue teams from Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay were deployed right away. However, the plane's white surface blended perfectly with the icy mountains, making it invisible from the skies. To catch the attention of rescuers, survivors thought of writing SOS on the roof of the fuselage using lipstick, but they didn't have enough to make the letters big enough to be recognizable on air. For days, all they did was hope for the best. Prayers. The survivors embrace their faith as they await saving or death, whichever comes first. Days after, in a twist of fate, the survivors found a small transistor radio on the wreckage. They used it to listen to search effort updates and found out that rescue missions were cancelled on their 11th day on the mountain. Upon hearing the news, they were engulfed with hopelessness and misery. As the days passed and the temperature plunged to negative 30 degrees Celsius, they continued to sob and pray. They didn't have enough food and clothing, no source of heat, but the most alarming of all was that their remaining food supply was running out fast. The icy mountains of the Andes were nothing like the jungles. There was no food source available, not even wild animals nor vegetation. They rationed 3 jars of jam, a tin of mussels, 8 bars of chocolate, candies, some bottles of wine, dried nuts, fruits, and plums, making them last as long as possible. It was reported that a man ate only one peanut for over 3 days. Some have even eaten cotton and leather from the plane seats. Desperation and starvation are setting in fast. Even with strict food rationing, the supply dwindled fast, until there was nothing left. Survival after a horrific crash is already a miracle, but what happened after that is far from miraculous. Beaten by the terrible weather and faced with impending death, they were still determined to survive. They had no choice but to consume the bodies of their dead companions for sustenance. It was far from easy, most especially for the faithful Catholic passengers. Some hesitated at first, but changed their minds a few days later. Others struggled to keep it down in the beginning, but eventually gave in. The last people to eat human flesh were devout Catholics Javier and Liliana Methal, also the oldest ones in the group. Liliana had a strong religious stand and was only convinced when told to look at the situation as a kind of Holy Communion. On the 60th day, a female survivor who refused to eat eventually died, weighing only around 25 kilograms. Just when they thought they were already experiencing the worst, an avalanche suddenly struck the fuselage while they were inside, killing 8. 16 were trapped in the snow-filled fuselage, buried in snow below their necks. For 3 days, they endured being in a very small space with little ventilation. On the 4th day of being stuck, they miraculously got to free themselves. A plane crash, starvation, horrific weather, an avalanche. What else is there to experience? Will rescue ever come? Should they move or stay in the same place? Over the next few days after the avalanche, they discussed walking further and looking for help. The first attempts failed, mainly because of malnutrition, extreme cold, and altitude sickness. On December 12th, 2 months after the crash, Canessa and Parado decided to brave the mountains westward towards Chile. They took on the difficult terrains for many days, despite not having climbing experience, a map, and other crucial supplies. Eventually, they reached the snowline. At long last, they have reached the boundary between the snow-free and snow-covered regions. From there, more and more signs of human presence appeared. Camping evidence, cows, the river. On December 20th, they reached a major milestone after a challenging trek. They saw some herdsmen across the river in Los Maitanes, Chile. The men couldn't hear them because of the sound of the river, so they communicated by writing on pieces of paper, wrapping them in stones, and tossing them to the other side. Canessa explained in writing that they had been in a crash, and 16 injured survivors were waiting at the wreckage. Sergio Catalan, a Chilean arriero or someone who transports goods using pack animals, gave them a sign that he understood the message. He knew about the Andes plane crash and couldn't believe that some passengers managed to survive. After throwing bread to them across the river, he rode on horseback for hours to notify authorities. 3 Chilean military helicopters were dispatched as soon as they received news about the Flight 571 survivors. On December 22nd, 72 days after the crash, rescue teams finally reached the remaining 16 passengers. They were treated for scurvy, malnutrition, dehydration, altitude sickness, and broken bones. As for those who died, they were buried together in a grave near the crash site, in a spot where locals think is safe from avalanches. Adorned by a pile of rocks and a simple stone altar with an orange iron cross. That tomb also serves as a memorial for them. Only Rafael Echevarren's body was returned home by his father to Uruguay. Was the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 71 a tragedy brought about by Friday the 13th bad luck? Was the aircraft too old to fly? The plane is only 4 years old with 792 airframe hours. For investigators, the crash is clearly a case of pilot error. Their 72-day ordeal graced headlines, but it was the cannibalism controversy that fueled global discourses. According to Roberto Canessa, who was then a 19-year-old medical student, they didn't survive because they ate the dead bodies of their comrades, but because they managed to find their way out of the mountains. At present, 2 of the most well-known survivors, Roberto Canessa and Nando Parado, dedicate big parts of their lives sharing their uplifting experiences and inspiring people. Roberto Canessa is now a pediatric cardiologist, while Parado is a motivational speaker who works with patients suffering from psychological trauma. The Andes Mountains are the most scenic natural attractions of South America, showcasing the continent's great beauty and ecological diversity. A prized destination for many high-altitude adventurers, it stretches for more than 7,500 kilometers in 7 countries: Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. A paradise for vacationists, but for those unintentionally stuck in its mists, it's a limbo shooting down death invitations from the skies. Ran aground, but they declined the invitation of death and refused to settle much longer in a would-be tomb. This story is considered one of the most grueling survival accounts of the 20th century. It has given the Andes Mountains a new, dark reputation as a tomb, even for the most hopeful souls.